Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the HEARTH Act overview for tribes. Just want to make sure that we're all in the right meeting today. I'm Jana Waters. I'm a realty specialist with the Division of Real Estate Services out of Central Office, and just want to welcome everybody. Hope you're having a good morning. So a few things to keep in mind as we go. I don't know if you guys can even unmute yourself or anything. I don't believe you can. So that reminder is kind of out the door, where I usually remind everybody to keep themselves muted and to keep their cameras off, just out of respect for the presenters. Questions. If you have questions, please place them in the chat. I will be placing some other items in the chat as we gain more attendees here for you with regard to the presentation and to different items. So keep mindful of the chat. And again, any questions, you can also raise your hand, but stick your questions in the chat is probably the best order so that I can stop at convenient times to get those questions answered for you. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Carla Clark, and welcome.
Hi, good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's HEARTH Act overview for tribes. We thank you all for your attendance to today's session, and we also thank you for allowing us the opportunity to present this information for you all today. As Janice said, my name is Carla Clark. I'm the Acting Division Chief for the Division of Real Estate Services out of BIA Central Office. We have a great team here today, and I want to take a moment to recognize and thank each of them for all the hard work and commitment that they've been putting on for this past year and previous years, working on HEARTH applications, and also to work to develop these trainings. We have Sharon Kidman. She's a Senior Realty Specialist, and she's also the BIA's HEARTH Act Coordinator. She works out of the Division of Real Estate Services out of BIA Central Office. We have Simone Jones, who's also a Senior Realty Specialist out of BIA Central Office, Division of Real Estate Services. And we have Jana Waters, also out of BIA, Senior Realty Specialist out of BIA Central Office, Division of Real Estate Services. Today we have the opportunity to have two attorney advisors out of the department's Office of the Solicitors out of Central Office, Mr. David Moran and Ms. Suzanne Nunn. We also have Sheila Herrera, who is the Executive Director for the TIWA Lending Services out of the Pueblo of Isleta. She's going to be providing an overview on the perspective of a tribe once HEARTH has been implemented. So we thank them all for their attendance and presentations today. They've all done a great job coordinating and making these trainings possible, so I want to thank them. Hopefully you guys can all see the agenda that we have up for today's session. We did have a HEARTH Act overview session yesterday as well. And we've also been busily working to provide HEARTH Act trainings for tribes that have already had approved HEARTH regulations, as well as BIA staff. So we continue to have that coordination throughout BIA nationwide. Sharon Kidman will go over the 52 IAM policy, as well as some of the regulations associated with HEARTH. The attorney advisors will go through the tribal checklist, HEARTH Act regulations, and then, as we said, Ms. Herrera will go through the tribe's role and perspective once HEARTH has been implemented. And then we'll wrap up with the question and answer session. So as Jana said, if you have any questions, comments, please put those in the chat. We will continue to monitor those. And then we'll follow up with just some closing remarks. So we thank everybody for your participation today. We look forward to a great session. Please feel free to ask any questions. We appreciate the department and BIA being committed to promoting and facilitating this information exchange with tribal nations, Alaska Native corporations, our various federal partners, state and local lenders, leaders to identify and implement ways that we can help support tribal self-determination and tribal self-governance regarding various trust matters, including HEARTH, infrastructure, renewable energy, leasing, and we want to make sure that we're fulfilling our trust responsibility to ensure that we have a positive impact for tribal communities. So like we said, we've been busily working on updating policies and regulations and providing training. So please take full advantage of this opportunity, ask questions, and we will, continue to follow up with you after the training session if there's questions that you may think of after the session is over. So with that, I appreciate the opportunity to do some opening remarks. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Ms. Sharon Kidman, and thank you all.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sharon Kidman. I am a Realty Specialist / HEARTH Act Coordinator for the Office of Trust Services at Central Office. I've been a Realty Specialist for the majority of my career and have had experience at the regional level and the agency level. Today, we will be conducting an overview of the 52 IAM 13 policy. As you can see, it's up here on the screen for you. The policy was most recently updated, modified June 16th of this year. So a copy of the policy can be found on the OTS website for your convenience. The actual path name of the website will be pasted into the chat so that you guys can see where to go to download a copy of the policy. But for today's purpose, we're not going to go into every single page of the policy. We're just going to go over the few pieces that are crucial to beginning a HEARTH Act application package for Central Office to review. So in the beginning here, because there's 19 pages to the policy, so we're just going to hit on a couple of them today. On the first page, we have the purpose, the scope, and the policy, what it is itself, along with the authority, the statutes and regulations, and the guidance provided there. We also have responsibilities of each office here. It's all laid out pretty easy to see on here and to read. The definitions are also have been put in here for you, and what they mean through the process itself. But the page that I'm going to actually jump down to is on page 5. It begins with the tribe's initial submission. The submission has to have 3 items included in the submission, one of which is the cover letter, an original cover letter that includes number 1. We'll jump down to 1.7AA of this page. An original cover letter that includes a request for review and approval of the regulations under the HEARTH Act. 2, contact information for parties with decision-making authority regarding the regulations. For example, tribal officers, legal counsel. And 3, any special circumstances regarding submission of the regulations, an urgent need for approval, a unique provision included in the regulations, etc. The cover letter must be accompanied by 1 set of the regulations, of the approved regulations, and a tribal resolution authorizing the regulation, and that must be an original copy. So where do you send these? You used to send them to the MIB, Main Interior Building, but now it's here and the address is located right there. You send them to the attention of the division chief, Division of Real Estate Services, and the address is right there, 1001 Indian School Road, Northwest, Albuquerque, New Mexico, 87104. And when the tribe is doing that, the main point of contact for this process will be myself. So if you have questions, you are welcome to send me an email. My email is my first, it's all lowercase, Sharon, SHARON, .Kidman, KIDMAN, @BIA.gov. I am the point of contact for all things HEARTH related. So by all means, if you have questions, you can email me. But this is how the process begins with the tribe. This is how it all begins. It's the tribe who drafts that and finalizes their regulations and sends them in along with the cover letter and the tribal resolution authorizing that code, that ordinance. Also, my part of the process too is that concurrently, I, as the HEARTH Act coordinator, and the short term for that is HAC, HAC. So I will concurrently request from the tribal point of contact a copy of the regulations in Word document form. So that begins the process. Once we receive it, it gets date stamped, and then the process begins by me reaching out to those people listed on the letter, on the cover letter. So the chairman, president, governor, whomever will designate in that letter who is to be the tribe's point of contact for the HEARTH Act regulations, and it will only be to those one or two people that I will be reaching out to. So we just want to make that clear, because it can't be everybody in the everybody that we think we should include. It's got to be only those people designated by the chairman, president, of who they want to be included in the HEARTH Act overview. So that's basically the initial submission part. A little bit about what happens during the review. I'm going to scroll down here. So on part B, which is halfway on page 6 and 7, it's called the initial review. So what happens after that initial part is over is that I will take that set of regulations, I send it along with the Word document to our contacts at that region, which region that tribe happens to be under jurisdiction. I will send a copy of that to them along with a copy to the solicitor's office. And the three of us jointly have 30 days, as you can tell. This is our guideline that we've set out. So we have 30 days to internally review and make comments to this. And then after that 30 days is up, we have an additional 15 days to schedule our internal call to discuss said comments that we all made on the regulation. So after that process is done and we have reached agreed upon comments from within, then I reach out to the tribe. So down on page, I believe this is page 7, and it goes to points number 4 and 5. I will send those comments over to the tribe's point of contact saying, please take a moment to review, and here, please give us some suggested dates to meet to discuss our comments. So that's kind of how we do the process to begin with and to start the review. So from there, after we do that, it's just a few more follow-up steps from that of reaching that agreed upon final version of the leasing code. So thus far, do we have any questions out there, Jenna?
Nope, no questions at this time. I did put the 52 IAM in the chat.
Okay, thank you. So basically, folks, as far as the policy is concerned, I'm not going to go through the rest of the pages for you just because there's 19 of them. But it goes into a section of, what happens if you have another set of modified. Once the first original review was done, then we have to do another, it goes into all of that. It also goes into a failure to resubmit, which just generally means that if the tribe wishes to, let's say things have overtaken them, more important emergency matters at their business and something else is going on, they just kind of let this go to the side, and maybe in 6 months' time they decided, you know what, we're going to table this until another time. That's perfectly fine. So we would go through what's called the withdrawal portion, and we've had that happen, and that's fine. Tribes can if they started, it's nothing, it's great. But if they, in the middle of it, they go, oh, wait, hold up, we're gonna change our mind, that's fine too. So we just have a specific process for that as well. And then we have a process for the final submission. There is a final. So once we have gone through all the comments and once we've reached that agreed upon final set or final leasing regulation, then I send another email to the president, chairman, and I let them know that the ordinance is ready for final submission. And that, in which case, at that point, the tribe must submit another original resolution because the first resolution covered the ordinance as it was. But as we go through the review process, there will be changes. So the second resolution is necessary because it covers the modifications done to the leasing ordinance itself. So, but after the final submission has been received at central office, it goes through another process called the surnaming and approval process. That process is outlined here under approval. There's lots of stuff that I do as the HEARTH Act coordinator to get it into our system, to get it to the Secretary of Interior so that they can review it, approve it, send it on to the Office of Regulatory and Collaborative Action, RACA, to publish and post. So there is a whole process to this. So this is kind of just a small outline for you this morning regarding the policy. Again, the original policy did come out in July of 2020. However, there was a need to make some modifications to it due to the fact that the location of where we received these, the regulations has changed. It's no longer in Washington, D.C. Now it's at the Albuquerque, New Mexico office, central office. So that was one of the reasons some of the processes were changed because that no longer happens, and that affected the Washington, D.C. Mail portion of it. So, but apart from that, you are welcome to download a copy of this. This is available for you. Jana just put it into the chat, so you're able to download that and look at it at your leisure. At this time, since I don't see that we have any questions from the audience, I am going to go ahead and turn this portion of the overview this morning to our two representatives from the Office of the Solicitor in Washington, D.C. And I will let them introduce themselves. David and Suzanne.
Good morning, everybody. My name is David Moran. I've been with the Solicitor's Office since 1991. Prior to that, I worked at the U.S. Senate and it was in private practice. Basically, I've worked with HEARTH Act since the act was enacted in 2012. And basically, and I also work in other matters related to land claims, environmental rights of ways, things of that nature. So, and I think, but have basically, like Suzanne, I think basically feel very strongly about the HEARTH Act. I think I've been working in Indian country for quite a number of years. So I think it's one of the most important initiatives that Congress has enacted to benefit, Indian and tribal sovereignty. So, so I'm a big fan of HEARTH, and I think it's worked out well for the tribes that have enacted their codes. And I'll turn it over to Suzanne now. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Suzanne. I am a solicitor, attorney advisor with the Office of the Solicitor and the Division of Indian Affairs. I've worked in Indian country since 2004. For a while, I think maybe 10 years on the tribal side, working in tribal governments in Arizona, on my family's reservations in Arizona, and have a lot of experience in leasing on Indian lands. So I'm really excited about the HEARTH Act. It's a terrific tool, like David said, for tribes to be able to take control of their own leasing. And so we're going to start with this sample checklist, and David and I created this with tribes in mind. So it makes it easier for tribes to draft their own tribal HEARTH Act codes. If you follow this tribal checklist, everything that you need to have in your code will be in your code. I'd like to point out two specific things at the top of this. First, the types of leases and the types of HEARTH Act codes that are allowed under the HEARTH Act are, as you can see, agriculture, residential, business, wind energy evaluation leases, wind solar resource leases, and public, religious, education, and recreational leases. Each lease type has their own mandatory provisions that must be in Tribal Hearth Act codes, and we'll go over a few of those. Most of those are spelled out in this checklist, and so if you use the checklist, you'll see where those are specifically pointed out. Also, I'd like to point out that everything on this checklist, the language and the definitions and everything, the provisions on the checklist are verbatim to the 25 CFR 162 regulations, which are the regulations that are applicable to the Hearth Act. But in a Tribal Hearth Act code, the tribe's provisions and definitions do not need to be verbatim to the 162 regulations. They only need to be consistent with the 162 regulations. So if a tribe has a definition or a provision that's worded a little bit differently, David and I will look at that and make sure that it's still consistent with the 162 regs, but it doesn't have to be exact. Also, David and I would also like to point out that it's not a meets and exceeds standard. It's a I just lost the words. Consistent with. Thank you. The words just went out of my head. So these are, first, this begins with the required definitions that must be in a Tribal Hearth Act code. There are a few of these that we'd like to point out that are not required, but we do strongly recommend. To just give you a recap of how David and I perform our legal sufficiency reviews of a Tribal Hearth Act code. When we review the code, we look for provisions that must be in there, so they're required provisions. So we'll have our comments will be under several categories. Required, which means they're mandatory. They must be in the Tribal Hearth Act code. Strongly recommended, which means they're not mandatory, but from a legal standpoint, David and I feel that it's important to have that in the Tribe's Hearth Act code. It's important for the tribe. And so we strongly recommend things, and we'll go through that as we go through this checklist. And then the last category that we have is discussion. So if there's a provision in the Tribal Hearth Act code that David and I would like to discuss with the tribe as to the intent behind the provision, or how that provision interacts with the Hearth Act statute and regulations, or how it interacts with the rest of the tribe's Hearth Act code. So we'll discuss that with the tribe during our external meeting that we have with the tribe. So one of the strongly recommended definitions that we include is the best interest of the tribe. As you can see the definition here in our tribal checklist. This definition we feel is really important for a tribe's Hearth Act code because it allows the tribe the flexibility to make tribal decisions on their own that they feel is in the best interest of the tribe. And I'll give you an example. The best example is if the tribe is creating a residential Hearth Act code and they would like to, they're creating some kind of a public housing subdivision or something for their members, and they'd like to possibly waive rental compensation or make it a nominal rental compensation for the members. The tribe can do that if in their tribe's heart, well, they can do that, but the best way to have it done is to include a provision that says that the tribe can waive rental compensation if it's in, if the tribe finds that it's in the best interest of the tribe to do so. And this just allows, it gives the tribe the foundation in case anybody questions why the tribe is doing that. It gives the tribe that foundation and allows the tribe that flexibility to do that. Also, items that can be waived in the best interest of the tribe are mandatory insurance provisions, mandatory performance bond provisions, things like that. So, oh, you're going too fast. Who's scrolling? Don't go so fast. And so we look for those are things that we look for provisions in. So going down, one other very important definition that David and I find that we discuss often with the tribes is public for the purposes of environmental review and significant effect on the environment. These are very important because the statute, the HEARTH Act statute, requires public notice and comment of a lease or a lease activity that will have a substantial or direct effect on the environment. And many tribes, as we all know, defining public can be problematic. And, we don't want any Joe Schmo down the street to come in and say, oh, I don't like this project, and so I'm gonna, create a problem for you. What we've done over the years that we've been doing these HEARTH Act reviews is we've tailored the definition of public for the purposes of environmental review to be more narrow, but still fit within the requirements of the statute. And so we've created this definition to say that the public means any person or entity who can demonstrate, they have to demonstrate that they will be directly substantially affected by the lease or the lease activity. So that really cuts down the population of public that can comment on on the lease or the lease activity. And also I just would like to I'd like to note too on the definition of tribal land or trust and restricted land or trust and restricted status. We have, these definitions are largely the same as the 162 regulations, but we have removed the language that talks about an interest therein because the HEARTH Act does not apply to fractionated interests. So the tribe has to own the parcel 100% in trust, and there can't be any other fractionated interest in that parcel in order for a HEARTH Act lease to be put on that parcel. Now, just a quick note, the tribe, even though a tribe has a HEARTH Act regulation and a HEARTH Act code, the tribe still has the ability to use the 162 regulations outside of the HEARTH Act. They can still, the tribes can still get execute a lease with secretary authority and have the secretary approve the leases. And in those leases, it is not limited to 100% tribally owned land. There can be fractionated interests and things on those particular leases, just not with the HEARTH Act. David, would you like to add anything?
No, I think that's an important point. Again, I think we've had instances where tribes that do have approved HEARTH Act regulations have asked the secretary to review and approve more complex leases. I mean complex because primarily for the reason that it does affect, there are some fractionated interest or allotments that are involved that basically that would be part of the leasing project. And so again, they would have to go to the secretary for that type of approval. And also on maybe really large projects that basically that are a little bit more complicated, and that basically, and maybe the lessor is, lessee rather, is insisting upon secretarial approval as opposed to tribal approval. So that's an important point, I think. So you always have that option available. And secondly, I think it's also to note that once a lease is approved under the HEARTH Act, any amendments, basically changes to that lease, can be done pursuant to tribe's HEARTH Act regulation. But again, a HEARTH Act regulation cannot be used to amend a secretarial approved lease. If you have a secretarial approved lease, basically amendments and changes, subleases, things of that nature to that lease have to be done through the secretary. But you do have the option on a secretarial lease to terminate that lease and then renegotiate the lease under your HEARTH Act.
Yes.
Thank you,
Great.
Susan.
Thank you, David. Okay, if you can scroll down a little bit more and we'll go through what these sections are. Okay, here we have the next thing that we look for are that must be in each tribal HEARTH Act code are provisions that identify what lands these regulations apply to. These regulations cannot apply to fee lands, individually owned Indian lands, fractionated interests, or mineral interests. So again, just 100% tribally owned parcels in trust or restricted status. We also have to see in the code what types of leases are being covered by the code. Is this an agricultural code? Is this a residential or a business or a wind and solar? That has to be listed in the tribe's HEARTH Act code to describe what the scope is. The tribe can do separate codes for each one of these, or the tribe can do one code that's comprehensive and includes everything. It's up to the tribe and the tribal government to decide how they would like to do that. The tribal HEARTH Act code must state all the applicable laws that are affected by the lease. And that would normally includes tribal and federal laws. The HEARTH Act does not apply to state laws. However, there are certain circumstances in which tribes want to have the state involved, maybe with a mediation or an arbitration clause or something of the sort. David and I do take that into consideration when we're doing the legal sufficiency review, and we will talk to the tribe and discuss that with the tribe. The tribal HEARTH Act code must state the effective date of the regulations, and it must include a provision that addresses the tribe's authority to enact this tribal HEARTH Act code or any other law. So such as maybe the tribal constitution, or if there is no tribal constitution, maybe the tribe has bylaws or articles or something like that. That have created that tribe and have given the tribe the authority to enact laws that they are governed by. So we need that provision in there as well. And then go ahead and go down a little bit. Each tribal HEARTH Act code must state that each lease has to identify several key provisions that are just they're relative, they're material contract provisions, basically is what they are. And so some of those provisions are the lease has to state the tract or the parcel of land that's being leased. So it must be described in a manner that allows LTRO to identify that leased premise. So it has to have a legal description or something of the sort so that LTRO, when recording, can identify the leased premises. Each lease and must have the purpose of the lease, must have the parties to the lease, must state the effective date of the lease, and must have the term of the lease type. Each lease type has a different term. A couple of them have similar terms. Agriculture, business, and wind and solar leases all can have a term, an initial term of 25 years with two 25-year options to renew. And so that's the maximum is 75 years on that. And just to point out, residential and religious and public leases can be for one term of 75 years, a total max term of 75 years. Wind energy evaluation leases are different. They can only be for 3 years initially, with only one 3-year option to renew. However, if a tribe would like to have the opportunity to, or the flexibility to turn a wind energy evaluation lease into a wind solar resource lease, it can do so as long as that language is within the lease and again, in the Tribal Hearth Act code. So keep going down. Other provisions here, we have the payment provisions that are required. The Tribal Hearth Act code and the lease have to provide for the payment of rent. Again, that can be waived if it's in the best interest of the tribe. Has to state the dates the payments are due, has to state the acceptable forms of payment. Now, the Tribal Hearth Act code does not need to list out each specific form of payment. It just needs to say that the lease has to include, must specify the acceptable form of payment. It must specify who the lease payments are made to. And if the lease payments are made directly to the tribe must maintain documentation of those payments that are sufficient in order to allow the secretary to discharge the trust responsibility of the U.S. So the Tribal Hearth Act code has to have that language in there if the lease payments are going to be made to the tribe. David, do you want to add anything?
No, I think it's just an important part on direct pay. Like again, I think as Suzanne mentioned, the Act specifically states that the Secretary maintains his trust responsibility with regard to trust monies or payment of rents, essentially. And so I think the way to do that, the tribe needs to keep its records because, again, I think basically at the end of the day audit, we have to be able to show that the tribes are receiving the payment that is listed in their leases for that particular land. So, and again, I think it's just a sidebar in that regard. When these lease leasing regulations are approved, the department basically publishes in the Federal Register approval of the lease, and that Federal Register notice states specifically that lands leased pursuant to a Tribal Hearth Act are not subject to state or taxes at all. Okay, so I think that makes it very clear because early on we had some problems with some states that were trying to tax lands leased pursuant to a Hearth Act ordinance. And I think basically the Act does not intend that, and I think the Federal Register notices specifically state that. So that's another reason for why you have to maintain your good records, so Secretary can basically enforce that provision if a state tries to collect taxes. Thank you.
You're welcome. And just to expand a little bit on that, the tribe can assess their own taxes on the lease or the lessee. So just if the tribe wishes to do so, it can do that. You can go down a little bit on this. So then the other required provisions are going to be enforcement provisions. The Tribal Hearth Act code and each lease must state if there's a process for termination, lease cancellation, any kind of trespass that might occur. And it also must state that the lessee has to apply, they have to adhere to or comply with any applicable laws, ordinances. There can't be any illegal or unlawful conduct on the reservation, the lease premises. Go ahead and go down a little bit, please, on the checklist. And so we also look for the Tribal Hearth Act code. If there are negotiated remedies in case the lessee or potential lessee has issues with any of the lease or provisions in the lease, or any violations that occur therewith, there doesn't have to be negotiated remedies, but we look for those. And we also look for an appeals process for the lessee. If the tribe does not want to have an appeals process, as long as there's language in there that states that the tribe's decision is final and there is no, it's non-appealable, that's fine. It's totally up to the tribe.
Okay.
We really work with tribes to create as much flexibility in their tribal Hearth Act code and to allow the tribe's Hearth Act code to be unique for each tribe. There is no one tribal Hearth Act code that is going to be the exact same as any other. Each tribe is different. Each tribe's situation is different. Each tribe's government infrastructure is different. And so David and I work very closely with tribes and Sharon as well to make sure that each tribe's Hearth Act code fits within that tribal community as best as it can.
So I could just expand a little bit on the, I'm sorry, for the
Yeah.
interruption, on the enforcement and appeals process. The act itself, Suzanne's absolutely correct. I think you don't have to have the appeals process in there, but the act itself provides for any party basically impacted by the lease to appeal directly to the secretary if they feel that basically the tribe is not following its own regulations, or they feel that basically that there has been some violation of law, either federal or tribal law. So I think, but secretary had in his or her discretion can basically can look into the matter, or he can say, I don't think there's a offense here, so like that, I'm not going to look into it at all. Same thing goes for enforcement of a particular lease. If the tribe is having trouble with a bad party, for instance, somebody's using premises for illegal purposes, and they want to have the assistance of the secretary, they can appeal to the secretary to help enforce that lease. And again, it's up to the secretary's discretion or not to take any action. But that's so. I just wanted to add those 2 points. Thank you.
Thank you, David. So pursuant to 162, there are other required provisions that must be in a Hearth Act lease, Hearth Act code. However, these provisions, again, as I mentioned earlier, can be waived if it's in the best interest of the tribe and the tribe determines it wants to do so. The indemnity provision is not one of those. That must be in the Tribal Hearth Act code. So the lease, so that has to stay there. But insurance provisions and performance bond provisions can be waived if the tribe feels it's in their best interest to do so. Go down on the checklist, please. And here are the required permanent improvement provisions. And there are specific provisions that are mandatory for wind energy evaluation leases. We call them wheels. And there are provisions that are specific to the wind solar resource leases as well. You can find those here in this checklist. You could go down on the checklist, please. And you'll find those here on the checklist. And I want to point out that on each entry that we look for on this checklist, we have provided the regulatory or the statutory site for reference if when you're drafting your code, you'd like to look to see where this language is exactly. We've provided those citations there so you can do so. And finally, we look for the environmental provisions that must be per statutory requirement in each Hearth Act code, Tribal Hearth Act code. And I'm going to pass this off to David because he's really the environmental guy and he really knows his stuff on this in this section.
Thank you, Suzanne. When the Hearth Act was going through Congress and, there were hearings were being held, things of that nature, there was a lot of debate on whether Congress should demand that a NEPA process for Hearth Act leases. Basically, and there was, the department at that time, administration argued vehemently that, I think that was not going to be any different than a 162 lease. I think the whole purpose of the Hearth Act, as Suzanne and Sharon and others have mentioned earlier, is to give basically tribes more control over their lands, particularly the leasing of their lands, and not to force a lot of regulations on them to do so. So it was decided that basically that NEPA was not applicable in this regard. But Congress did insist upon, and basically, and it says, and it specifically states in the act, that all leasing projects have to go through an environmental process. But that environmental process is completely up to the tribe, how you want to define what that process is. The requirement of the act is basically is that you provide that environmental review be done, number one. Number two, that you provide for basically public comment on that. And then secondly, that you respond to those comments. With that said, I think the legislative history makes it very clear that that review has to be a meaningful review, and it cannot be a meaningful review unless you provide adequate opportunity for comment and basically a response to those comments. And which goes back to what Suzanne was explaining earlier, is why we really look to the definition of public, and we look to the definition of substantive and substantial effects on the environment. On the public, I think for it to be a meaningful environmental review, whatever that review is, and whatever basically steps and processes the tribe goes through, you need to publish those in a format, particularly these days, probably the web is best, or newspapers, the general circulation, what the results of that environmental review are, to allow for comment. And and the definition of public goes to that one that should be far-reaching enough that anybody that's going to have a significant impact, basically, or they can show, they demonstrate, as we have stated in the definition, that they're impacted by the thing, has an opportunity to comment. And then basically you provide an opportunity, and you provide responses to those comments in the same manner that basically that you solicited comments in the first place. Now, unlike NEPA, I think there is not really, the tribe can decide how they want to handle comments. I think the tribe is really basically the arbitrator and can decide whether the comments they received really have demonstrated a significant impact on the environment. If so, they respond to that. If it's something basically somebody outside of Indian country just doesn't like Indian country and is complaining, you don't have to respond to those, I think, essentially, in other than just a general matter. And the act itself does not require mitigation, meaning that if somebody actually demonstrates or shows enough to demonstrate a significant impact, well, I guess it's totally up to the tribe, whether they want to be a good neighbor or not, whether they make changes or, basically address that in mitigating basically the impact that might be. Now, again, I think it's totally up to the tribe. Now, if you don't do any mitigation, does that party have basically a recourse against you? It really depends on the particular matter. But unlike NEPA, there's not a required to mitigate. So, again, we really encourage tribes to be as broad as they can on the definition of public, because that does make the environmental review meaningful. I think because, there's something that, the GAO basically audits this program on a yearly basis. They take a look at how many regulations have been approved. They look at basically those are being enforced by the tribes, things of that nature. So, again, I think, the only negative feedback we've gotten from Congress on the program is instances where people have complained about the environmental processes, and basically, and we have been able to sidestep those and explain in an adequate manner that that basically that things are working the way they should be working. So in that regard, that's pretty much what it is. So Suzanne, back to you.
I think that's it. That's the end of our tribal HEARTH Act legal sufficiency checklist. Again, all of these provisions are those that a tribe should be aware of, may need to have, or may be strongly recommended to have in their Tribal HEARTH Act code. And when drafting a Tribal HEARTH Act code, we really encourage you to look at this checklist and go through it with your drafters and your tribal council and whatever department or division handles all of these different aspects of the leasing. And this tribal checklist can be found on the website. There's this exact copy is on the website. However, if you're unable to find it, or if you would like us to send you a copy, we're happy to email that to anybody who requests. I will put David and my email address in the chat, so feel free, please contact David and I if you have any questions on any of this legal sufficiency part, or any questions on when drafting your Tribal HEARTH Act, or any of the creating the lease, maybe some kind of a lease template that you guys are using, not a template, but the lease provisions. And we're happy to help. We're here. As we stated before, we strongly believe in the HEARTH Act statute and its regulations, and we feel this is an amazing tool for tribes. We really hope that more tribes take advantage of it, and so we're here to help in any way that we can. Thank you, everybody, for attending the program.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Have a good rest of the morning. Or we're available for comments or being for questions and later on. Thank you.
Sharon, before you move on, I don't see any questions in the chat, just letting you know.
Okay, hi everyone. I've been reading some of the chats and stuff, but first of all, the two things that I did publish is the link. So everybody should go to the chat, take a look at that Q&A, and I published the link. The link, if you click on it and you scroll to the bottom of the web page, shows you where these checklists are. Okay, so please click on that link and scroll to the bottom. This checklist that we just reviewed is on that website page, along with other good information for HEARTH. Secondly, I published my name, my title, and my email contact information. And soon, Suzanne and David will also publish their contact information, their email addresses. So I'm going to go ahead now and turn it over to the last portion of our training, our overview. It's actually just an overview today. We're not really training, so to speak. We just want to go over these documents and such with you guys. But today, I think this is the most important part of our presentation. Is we're so excited that we have a tribal partner, and you know, we could have tons of them out there, but we were so glad that this lady was available to do this with us. Their tribe just went HEARTH in 2019, I believe, but her name is Ms. Sheila Herrera. Sheila is from the Pueblo of Isleta, and she is the executive director of the TIWA lending services for the Pueblo of Isleta. So at this point, I'm going to turn over the presentation to Ms. Herrera, and she's going to give a tribal perspective on HEARTH implementation. So again, please utilize the Q&A. We will receive it, and then we'll get to your question, okay? So Sheila?
Hi, thank you, Sharon. Good morning. I'd like to, first of all, thank Bureau of Indian Affairs Office of the Trust Service Central Office for inviting me to present this morning. Like Sharon said, I'm Sheila Herrera, the Executive Director for TIWA Lending Services. We are a Native Community Development Financial Institution, also known as a CDFI. We provide home loans to Isleta tribal members who reside in Isleta Pueblo, along with consumer loans, and our development services consist of financial literacy classes. Like Sharon had told you earlier, Isleta Pueblo implemented the HEARTH Act in 2019. This was a great accomplishment for Isleta Pueblo, but through all the excitement, we also had some challenges. I'm hoping today I can provide you with some helpful tips as you might be thinking of your tribe moving forward with implementing the HEARTH Act. First of all, and most importantly, you need to form a committee for guidance. And these, there's some important questions that you probably want to ask yourself. Is your tribe ready to enact in leasing regulations? So you want to start the conversation with your tribe, governor, tribal council, realty, or land department. In our case, natural resources, the environmental reviews would play a big part for in this department, and any other departments that might be involved with the implementation of the HEARTH Act. So is my tribe willing to take on the responsibility of approving leases? How long, the questions you probably want to ask yourself is, how long is BIA taking to approve your leases? How long is it going to take your tribe to approve the leases under the HEARTH Act? Who's going to prepare your environmental reviews? And are you prepared to manage, enforce, or cancel leases? What will be the administrative and financial burden on the tribe? You're going to have to create new positions, such as a realty officer, maybe an environmental reviewer. And then are you going to put aside budgeting for salaries for new employees? And are you going to be expanding and creating this office space and storage space? Does your tribe have the capacity to process and approve and encode leases for recording? So you want to make sure you examine all these tribal infrastructure's capability for the process of leasing. We can go to the next slide. And here we went ahead and we formed a committee. And you can see here we have, in this committee, we had our surveying and mapping department with us. We had our attorney, Denise Looney with Shuoff Law Offices, and the staff of Tiwa Lending Services, myself and Miranda Lenti. We kept, our first challenge was what department was going to handle this job function. So we kept pushing this position on our surveying and mapping. The more we pushed, the more they kept refusing us. So we finally said, okay, well, this isn't going to work. So it took us a few years, and we actually said, well, let's look at our leasing law and see what department is responsible for this position. And we saw that it was our governor's administrative office. But because of, having new tribal administration and new governors every 2 years, it was kind of hard to, we had to continue to educate our new tribal administration. So our committee created a job description, and we listed the purpose duties that we felt were needed. And here we are 3 years later, and we have no realty specialist, no environmental reviewer, funding for this position, or office space. So as you might say, we kind of put the cart in front of the horse. But I have to give kudos to our following BIA partners. Our committee is so grateful for our strong relationship with Sharon Kidman, Realty Specialist, Carla, David, Suzanne, and James and Lionel and Simon, all with the BIA Central Office. They could have told us, you're on your own, but they didn't. Like they stated earlier in the presentation, they're great supporters of the HEARTH Act. And if it wasn't for them, like I said, we still don't have this realty specialist in place. So they've been here there for us through all of these challenges. And the next, our other challenge was we had to revise our residential lease. So we can go to probably the next screen. So here we had to revise our residential lease, and we amended the language in paragraph 10 of the pre-HEARTH lease, and we moved it to paragraph 3. It made it less clear about whether a leasee could mortgage the lease without further tribal approval. We also went back to the old lease and reinserted the old language and revised paragraph 3 and 1 to make it clearer to read. Prior to our revised residential lease, we had to create a certificate of approval incorporating some of BIA's language only for leases that had the unclear language in paragraph 3 for the leases that were approved from April 2019 to present. So then after we made all these changes, we took our red line residential lease revisions to Tribal Council. And a few weeks ago, there was not a quorum, so we have to actually go back hopefully sometime next week to present to Tribal Council and Governor our red line changes.
Sheila, can I jump in real quick here? I just want to point out that this provision in their lease had to be revised because in the beginning it had the secretarial approval language of the 162 regulations, and we had to revise it. We worked with Sheila to revise it to have the HEARTH Act language, which allows the tribe in whatever capacity their tribal HEARTH Act code dictates to approve these leases. If this language still said that the secretary had to approve it and didn't have the HEARTH Act language in it, then any signature from a tribal chairman or anybody other than the secretary would it wouldn't void that lease, but it wouldn't allow that the lease would not be effective. So it's important to note that that language in this lease had to be changed from secretarial approval to tribal approval under the tribe's HEARTH Act, approved HEARTH Act code.
Sheila, if I could just add one more point to that, and I believe, I forget how long ago, Sharon, but there may be in some of your regions, there might be HUD personnel that do not feel that basically that they can sign off on HEARTH Act leases. If you do have that problem, just direct them towards Sharon, Suzanne, or myself, because again, I think, I think it's a fairly new act. They might not be familiar with it, but again, I think there's the same rules and obligations where the government basically go to the HEARTH Act leases as well as secretarial leases. Okay.
Thanks for that input. So then we can, and then the next document that we created, our committee created, well, I guess probably the most important things to the residential lease, the key components is you want to make sure you align your residential lease in accordance with your approved HEARTH Act leasing law. Your term not to exceed 75 years, and having a standard residential leasing form will make it a little bit more efficient for tribal members to obtain residential leases. And I highly recommend Tribal HEARTH Act include leasehold mortgages. So check your code for that provision. Next slide. And then here we created a resolution. And we can go to the, kind of look at that. And we're happy to share all these documents with any of the tribes that need it to. That way you don't have to go and reinvent the wheel. And just make sure that it's in accordance with your leasing law. And then we did a checklist for the residential lease, and we got this from the BIA website, and then from there we just, the committee created a checklist for the realty specialist and the environmental reviewer to kind of help guide them with the residential leases, which kind of consisted of the following. We had the required information, documentation needed, and then we did a home site development application to help with the process of obtaining a home on this letter reservation. We did a section for required environmental reviews, and then presenting the lease to tribal council, and then finally the lease execution of the recording. And this was our checklist. And then from there, the committee also, so this is part of our checklist here. And then we can show you our job description that we created. So the committee developed a realty specialist job announcement. In this job description, the realty specialist job functions would consist of, prepares, reviews, negotiates, and enforces the residential, business, agricultural, wind and solar, and public purpose leases and rights of way within the Pueblo, reviews land conveyance documents, and conducts other realty functions. And then this is, yeah, so this is what we created. And I think if you know, with our experience, if we would have formed a committee at the beginning, and before we jumped into enacting our leasing regulations, this process would have been a lot smoother for us. We would have been able to maybe go to the governor. At the same time, our lease would have been in accordance with our leasing law. We would have had a position we would have had a position created for the realty specialist. We would have figured out which department would handle this, and the functions of as far as salaries, and all of this played a big part. Another thing too is like, where is this person going to stay, and do we have enough storage, and the recording part of it. There was a lot to it. And if we would have had everything in place, we would be in a different position right now. And like I said earlier, it's been 3 years, going on over 3 years, and we still don't have anybody in this position. So hopefully all the tips I provided you will help guide you in enacting your leasing regulations. Here is the cost. I think that we were showing just what it would take. You have your office space, computer, laptop, and this is just things that the committee started looking at. You're going to need a desk and chair, okay, the hard drive, work phone. We're just jotting down all these different ideas, and the land database, the software up front, and your annual cost, access to a vehicle, your land database, software, phone bill, leasing offer salary, fringe benefits, training with travel. But most important, I guess, after you do create this position, who's going to do the training for this realty specialist? And it wasn't only just the realty specialist position, but I think we were more concerned also with the environmental reviewer. Right now, currently, you know, BIA, before Isleta enacted in their leasing law, BIA did all of our environmental reviews. And when we implemented the HEARTH Act, we said, okay, well, who's going to do our environmental reviews? Not only, it was kind of a burdensome, because now we had to actually find somebody we had to outsource it out and pay somebody to come out and do our environmental reviews. And they were charging us $2,500 to come out and do these environmental reviews, when before we never had to pay for this with prior to the HEARTH Act. So Isleta said, okay, well, who's going to take on this responsibility of an environmental reviewer? Even though our natural resources, we felt that would be the right department, it ended up not being, because we didn't have the proper training for an environmental reviewer. So you want to, all these things you probably want to, take into consideration. So I guess hopefully, I want it to be a smooth process for you all. And I just, I can't express the importance of maintaining your relationships with BIA. They continue to help us today with our recording and issuing of our title status report. So thank you so much to Sharon, Carlos, Suzanne, James, and Lionel, Simone, all of you with the BIA Central Office. You guys have been great to work with, and thank you so much for everything that you've done for us. So I'm not sure if there's any questions.
Does anybody have any questions for any of the presenters? You are able to use the live event Q&A chat. Other than the initial problem with the viewing, I don't see any other questions that are in the live Q&A chat. And we did publish our contact information. So that's in there, along with a link to the OTS website for HEARTH, where if you scroll down to the bottom of the pages, you can also click, there's another link within that site that takes you to all the approved regulations thus far. So if there's no questions, you still can reach out. I will also publish Ms. Herrera's email in the comment section here so that you guys, if you have questions for her, you can send them to her. You can copy me. It's entirely up to you, but we are there. Our information is there for your contact needs. So with that said, I don't see any new questions coming into the chat. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our Acting Division Chief, Carla Clark, and she's going to close out with a few remarks. Thanks, everyone.
Sharon, we may have lost her. I don't see her logged in any longer. So I guess with anything closing that we can go ahead and close as of now.
Yes.
Okay, thank you everyone for participating, sitting in. We enjoy teaching any of the tribes or anything as we go along with any new items that pop up in our form of business. So thank you for sitting in today.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Enjoy the rest of your week. Bye.